This is interesting. Donald Trump today announced that he was suing the big tech companies, Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, Twitter and Jack Dorsey, Google, which owns YouTube, and their CEO Sundar Pichai, arguing that they did not have the right to ban him from all of their platforms. And I think a lawsuit such as this is much needed. Donald Trump is on the right side of history here, since everybody wants to talk about the right side of history. And sooner or later, a case like this is going to rise, I believe, to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to reassess their strategies as it pertains to the overall First Amendment jurisprudence in this country. I think New York Times v. Sullivan no longer makes sense some 50-odd years after it was signed, almost 60 years after it was signed, in a social media era. And I have argued for a long time that Trump being banned and collusion occurring where every big tech platform simultaneously banned Donald Trump is a major issue in the country that directly affects the foundation of First Amendment discussion. Now, the challenge here is figuring out how companies like Twitter and Facebook, which have become our default town squares, apply the standard of speech given that they are not technically the governmental entities. Now, there are some interesting arguments, right? One argument is that they're a common carrier, and that just as your phone company doesn't have the right to tell you who you can call and who you can't call, and to monitor everything that you say on that call, and just as your internet company doesn't have the right to tell you, by and large, that you can't go to certain websites, so too your social network should not be able to restrict what you are able to put out into the public arena. There are also some interesting cases. So that's a common carrier argument, much like a telephone and also the internet. In other words, you can't stop somebody from getting the phone unless theoretically they're in prison. Also, there are interesting case law out there. There is interesting case law about some of these cities and towns which were owned by companies and what sort of restrictions they could allow inside of those company towns. Back in the day, if you think about it, there used to be companies, let's say a mine or a factory, that would build around the mine or the factory company-owned housing to allow the employees to live there. And there were interesting case law about what sort of First Amendment speech rights still existed inside of those towns, even though they were owned by the company. And that, to me, is an intriguing precedent that could be built to potentially fit the framework that we have today, where the Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube universe is so wildly strong. And I don't think there's any doubt that there is an arbitrary and capricious nature to which they decide who is allowed to speak and who is not allowed to speak on their platforms. So, without diving into the particulars of Donald Trump's lawsuit, which was filed in Florida, likely because he wants to have the benefits of the new law that was signed into law by Ron DeSantis, keeping big tech companies from banning going forward. It's also a class action lawsuit. I testified in front of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on big tech related regulations. And I think there is a lot that is going to come in the years ahead. The analogy that I made then is just as the Andrew Carnegies and the J.P. Morgans and the Henry Fords and the Rockefellers, John J. Rockefellers, just as they became massive capitalistic powers, the Standard Oils at all of that era, were eventually broken up because of the Gilded Age wealth that was created. Well, that's what we have unleashed in a modern era with big tech. And I think we need antitrust law to go back over all of the powers that regulate there with big tech and start to make substantial changes in terms of the power that those companies are able to levy. And I think Donald Trump is on, again, the right side of history with this lawsuit going forward.